Hello and welcome to the Creative Corner. This time's edition is all about Effie, the partnership we have with them, and the report that we did last year on the awards and some of the great learnings that we saw from the winners come out of that. We're going to be focusing on one particular pillar, and that's bringing the idea to life. And in order to look at those things, I've got some amazing guests with me. So I have Karina Wilsher, who is the UK board chair for Effie and also global CEO of Anomaly. I have
Hello,
Ian.
everyone.
Hi. I have Ian Hampton from NHS England.
Hello.
And finally, Sabina Usher from MullenLowe Group.
Hi.
So, obviously, we are in unprecedented times. One must say that on every webinar that we do currently. At this moment in time, Karina, how important is Effie for the industry in the UK?
Yeah, I mean, so Effie's the leader of market effectiveness globally, and I think we see our role here in the UK really to continue to champion the practice and I would say the discipline of effectiveness, whether that's through inspiring content and training, sharing learnings and intelligence given the data set, the huge data set that we sit upon, and like today, recognizing and awarding those practitioners who have really been able to successfully develop effective marketing strategies and work that works. And I think, to your point, given the huge punctuation of equilibrium and the amount of disruption that has happened globally and absolutely here in the UK, I think there couldn't be a more important time and a more valuable time for the role of Effie here in the UK.
What I really love about Effie is the way that actually the organisation has really thought about what are the main pillars of effectiveness and have put them in a way that helps, I think, practitioners think about it. Can you give us a little bit of an outline of those, Karina?
Yeah, sure. So, we're absolutely committed to advancing the industry, and I think some of the frameworks that we've developed will help enable that development. And so the four pillars essentially are: the first, we're looking at, how do you really identify the challenge, the context, the objectives, the old saying of, oh, for the freedom of a tight brief, right? Being really, really specific. And we definitely recognize that clarity and focus leads to effectiveness. The second pillar is all around uncovering genuine insights that lead to the strategic idea. So diagnosing the challenge, truly understanding the audience, right? Whether that's through ongoing research or continuous learning, and the belief that a problem well defined is a problem half solved. So really doing the diligence there to create that relevance. And I think the third pillar is, of course, what we're focusing on today, which is about bringing the idea to life, and within that, the compelling creative approach, but also, and increasingly so, recognizing that creativity and context are two sides of the same coin. So looking at the proliferation of the media landscape and how best to engage. And then the fourth pillar, of course, is results, right? And we found that Effie winners are way more likely to, really impact the business and demonstrate market share growth as the primary result.
Yeah, thanks for that, and a really great explanation. As you say, we're focusing on bringing an idea to life today. And as I was writing the report and reading all of the case studies, there were some very clear learnings coming out around both channels and creative. So for channels, more channels were used by winners. They tended to be, or at least to include the bigger broadcast channels, but then conversely also really focus on a number of very small, tightly defined channels that were there for a specific purpose. And I think the case study that Sabina and Ian are going to talk about is a really great example of that. And then in terms of spend, it's often thought that you must outspend the competition. Competition obviously slightly difficult to define in the NHS perhaps, but that's not true. You can be massively effective on a smaller budget. And of course, to do that, the best way is to have some great creative that really resonates and breaks some of the molds, breaks some of the tropes of the category to really get it into those audiences' hands. So that was very clear from the report. And one of the case studies in that area was the NHS and the great work that Ian and Sabina had done. So Ian and Sabina, I would really like to hear in your own words, what was the challenge you faced? What did you do to go about it? And what are some of the key learnings that everybody could benefit from hearing?
Right, I think I'll kick off then, Sabina, with the challenge. So the We Are the NHS campaign launched in 2018, and it confronted very starkly workforce shortages in the NHS. There hadn't been an overt advertising campaign focused on workforce for over 10 years. We were confronted with a vacancy rate of about 110,000 people. Out of a workforce of 1.3 million, that's a significant amount. And it was recognised that we needed to do something about that to future-proof the NHS, to ensure that we could continue to deliver the world-class healthcare that we do. That was the challenge.
Yeah, and I think nursing specific deficit was, I think, Ian, correct me if I'm wrong, but at about 34,000 at the time.
Oh, well, actually, it was way worse than that. It was 87,000 when we started. What I would say is that the good news is that we are at a rate. I mean, the journey hasn't completed, but the rate is now 34,000. So I can demonstrate very early in this that We Are the NHS has made a tangible contribution.
But just to frame that, that's enough still to fill 2 full-size hospitals, right?
Yeah,
so, you know,
absolutely.
our challenge remains incredibly difficult. And I think it's really important that we remember the cultural environment we were operating in at the time of brief. Obviously, at the moment, in a world of COVID, we are witnessing an outpouring of love and support for the healthcare industry, and particularly nurses on the front line. But, you know, at the time of brief, way back in 2019, before any of this craziness, pity and disregard really better prevailed. The kind of were the prevailing attitudes at the time towards you know, a workforce that was overstretched and understaffed, experiencing cuts, shortages, policy changes, and recruiting in that environment was like incredibly difficult, to say the least. And yet the NHS's future survival relied on driving that steady stream of nursing applications. And then on top of that, the real clangor was that we had a third less budget than we were expecting, right? So the point you guys were making at the beginning about outsmarting, not outspending, became an absolute necessity, and actually forced us to think about the brief in a really, really different way to unlock growth and to do it both efficiently and effectively.
I think it's beholden on me to say that all advertising budget in the NHS is a balance. So there are other priorities we are always confronted with. So whilst I recognise the dip, there were other things going on. Sorry to say that.
So, you know, I think our kind of principle and approach was to start with audience, and you can rarely go wrong. Historically, we'd focused on teenagers because they are, you know, obviously a demographic primed to receive our message, primed to, you know, their next step on the university ladder. But, you know, our kind of ambitious growth targets required us on rethinking audience fundamentally. So what we did was start with a kind of attitudinal hypothesis, and actually by creating an audience of people focused on attitudes, not demos, we found this whole previously untapped opportunity in career switchers. So those that, you know, might be convinced to join the NHS in the quest to do something more meaningful, but, you know, a really hard audience to convince. We had no idea what it was. You know, they probably had families, they were more likely to be concerned about financial insecurity, going back to study a degree. So huge opportunity, really difficult to convince. So what all this research enabled us to do was basically create 2 specific journey maps, from the journey for each audience, from inspiration all the way to application. Ian he's got them on his wall in the office, I think.
I still have them on my wall in the office. It's just fundamental to everything we've done, identifying those journeys.
I love it that it's still living and breathing within every office space.
I haven't visited the office too often, but they are still there.
And that really shaped our thinking, and, you know, all the way from inspiration through to passive consideration through to active research, Ian, keep me honest, reinforcing decision through to application. And that really Thank you. That really enabled us to understand not just what we were saying at each of those stages, but where we were going to say it.
No, I think what I want to do is put across the fact that doing your research first, identifying your audiences and understanding them is key to any channel choices that you make. Those 5 pillars, the identification of those 5 pillars actually changed the way I think about. I've been doing this for 30 years in the public sector, and it changed the way I thought about the choices we make on channels. Identifying the customer journey from not knowing anything about us to application identified not only the need to inspire at the start, which is naturally a broadcast approach, but also those other channels that can reinforce people's thinking and reinforce their journey through to application. So passive consideration, you need longer cast copy that delivers a channel. So absolutely, that prior work underpinned everything that we did.
And I think fundamentally what it enabled Ian to do was to go back to his stakeholders and say, we cannot convince a generation of people to join the NHS in a display ad saying apply now, which our budget might have led us to. And the most fundamental thing that the research uncovered was this emotional truism that perhaps sounds obvious, but was a big eureka moment for us, which is that we found this huge pool of people that were receptive to the idea of being a nurse. That actually wasn't our challenge, which was, an unexpected discovery, but that they had a huge crisis of confidence that they were going to be able to do the job. So what our comms needed to do was overcome that emotional barrier. And that was unified across both our audiences. And that then led us to a naturally broadcast approach, because we needed to speak to them. We also needed to speak to the people that influenced them. So parents, peers, friends, etc.
And that's key. That's really important reinforcement, whilst it's quite difficult to get approval for that. Those secondary and tertiary audiences are absolutely key to what we're looking at, which is a fairly long consideration period. I mean, we had 2 jobs. Remember, we were recruiting people to degree courses, not to starting a job on a Monday. So that is a commitment, both financial and in time terms. The support of secondary and tertiary audiences is absolutely key to that.
So that fundamentally did 2 things for us, and it had to reinvent the media plan and the channels that we chose, because we had to do that inspiration job at the beginning and speak to as many audiences as possible to really sell the NHS as an institution that one could feel pride in working in. And then from a creative point of view, we couldn't just speak to the rational benefits, because it wasn't going to do the job.
Yeah. Thanks for that. That is, just really outlining how you uncovered the challenge and how you reframed it, because thinking about the winners all the way through, it's that thinking, you understanding what the problem is, but then understanding the problem and framing it in a way that you can then go on to really affect is brilliant. I know, Karina, you've got some comments on the great creativity that these guys brought as well as just the media. So do you want to give us a little bit of that flavour?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm so impressed with the work and the case, and I think that, as we've already touched on, that whole premise of outsmarting versus outspending, and not relying on a lazy approach of just buying attention, but genuine engagement. And I think one thing that struck me beyond all of the rigor around the audience and the insights was just what Sabine was talking about, which is, identifying within that audience that there were some major attitudinal barriers. And I think the creative approach really unlocked that by understanding that the work needed to feel incredibly authentic and incredibly intimate, and allow people and give people permission that they could rise to the occasion and be part of the we. So I was really, really impressed by the creative there as well.
That's really kind of you to say, Karina. I'm particularly pleased with that, because we work very hard at it. Underpinning all of our work is the honesty of showing real people doing real jobs. Another element of that is that we show the achievability of the steps we're asking people to take, so that people recognise themselves in those roles, and they recognise the achievability of taking the steps that they need to take in order to be a nurse. we've worked exceptionally hard at that. I think also another element of it is to reflect the intimacy of being a nurse, of the reality of being a nurse across, no matter what your gender, no matter what your demographic, that the reality of being a nurse is not unachievable for people.
And I think the consistency across touch points is also really key. So that was a consistent, ownable kind of brand idea across our TVCs, across our social films, across our CRM films. Like everything was designed to kind of stir the emotions as well as underpin those kind of more rational points when people needed to explore more, to nurture them to application, and making sure that we didn't lose them.
That's really, really good. Sorry to interrupt, Sabina, but I just want to make this point. The phrase that we use, "we are the NHS," is utterly intentional. So to move from pity and awe to actually recognising that we are the NHS, that we are the British institution, that we can be part of it. Something I haven't mentioned before is that we have a retention angle to this as well. It is important that we have existing staff recognising and feeling pride in what they're doing. We are the NHS. The reality of what we do provides that.
Thank you. I mean, I just think that one of my favourite campaigns, absolutely, the fact that you've gone to really reflect that, the true experience. I mean, for me, that is a category convention breaker, that is doing something in a different way and makes it super, super powerful. So from that, obviously we're getting into awards season, we're getting into people putting their papers in. What for you is the key lesson that people should be taking forward in terms of effectiveness? So maybe Ian, if we start with you.
I think everything starts with the audience, understanding your audience, gathering the information and gathering the insights is key to. So I've had challenges getting creative and media choices through senior management, but if you've got that evidence, then you are far better placed to have the opportunity, to have the joy of being able to deliver what you want to deliver. I think one emerging point is data as well. So analysis after campaigns, seeing exactly what's happening at a granular level across channels and indeed across creative is an emerging requirement.
Brilliant, thank you. And Sabina?
I think mine would have to be a give a shit ability. So why am I going to care as a normal person who doesn't work in advertising or communications? Why am I going to care about this, and how do I get involved? And I think if we view it through that lens and hold ourselves to a kind of critical higher standard, then you can't go wrong.
Great, thank you. And I do want to see that phrase being repeated across the year. Then we'll know that we've really made some effective creative corners. And finally, Karina, what's your piece of advice?
Yeah, I think to complement the answers that have just been given, sort of as the third leg of the stool, if you like, I would say just be boldly ambitious, right? I think if the last 15 months have taught us anything, it is, not a time for incremental thinking, and there's so much change that is happening. So to be really, to get comfortable with the uncomfortable and to do the diligence with all the rigor around the audience, but then, really, really embrace risks. And as you said, we have seen that the most effective and the greatest ideas are the ones that truly break the mold.
So thank you, everybody. It's been an absolutely brilliant session. Great to hear your views, and good luck to everybody putting in their papers now for effectiveness with the Effies for this year. Thanks.
Thanks, Eleanor.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.